Where do I start? Hi there, my name's Catherine and I have a problem. I made my September TBR a couple weeks ago before I went up to visit my family in Scotland, and I said in that video that I planned on reading this book, Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber, in the month of September, this month we're currently in, and that if I liked it, I probably was going to read the second one. I liked it. So I read the second one and I loved it. I loved it so much. at this point, I fell down a rabbit hole that I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to climb out of ever again. I finished it, and then I felt this emptiness that I find it hard to describe. I'm so sorry if you can hear my dog. I've just given her some lunch and I think she's making some ASMR mouse sounds in the background. I'm not sure if I should stop. Sienna, you done? Wanna come up for a cuddle? Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Wipe your booger. There we go. You gonna sit? No. What'd you hear? What'd you hear? Okay. Hopefully she doesn't make any more sounds. Then I bought all three of these books and continued to fall down the rabbit hole. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about all 5 books in the Caraval and Once Upon a Broken Heart series by Stephanie Garber. I think these are the only ones she's written in this world. It's all set in the same world. And I'm so obsessed with them. I've not been this obsessed with something since I finished the second season of Bridgerton, which was a whole other time and a whole other experience that I won't get into now. I finished Ballad of Never After and it was like this hole took place in my heart. Like I was reading it and I was getting close to the end and I was like, I don't want this to stop. I don't want this to be over. Please don't let this end. Please. And then it did, and it took a bit of my heart along with it. So I just really need to vent about my feelings, get it out into the atmosphere, just talk it out. I've tried to explain to my husband what's going on and he did say I could read them, but I didn't want him to read them and then not like them and then that start an argument between us, you know what I mean? Like I feel quite defensive of them. So yes, I told him unless he actually desperately wanted to read them, not to do it. As soon as I finished Ballad of Never After, I went into this sort of fugue-like state. I was on Skye at the time, that's where my family lives, it's in Ireland and Scotland. So I was visiting them, I finished Ballad of Never After, and then I sort of went a bit crazy. I started Googling everything I could about the book, finding out when the next one's coming out, which is only next month, thank God, but still, that's too far away. I'm not coping quite well with the wait already. So I pre-ordered the book through Waterstone so I could get the special edition that had the bonus chapter content, I'm pretty sure it comes with. So that's done, I'm getting that, but it's hardback and my copies are paperback, so they're not going to match. So I think pretty much I'm going to have to buy replacement copies, but then I formed an attachment with these physical copies now, I think, so I don't know if I will. This is going to be a rambling video if you can't tell already. I am just feeling extremely passionate about this series. So yeah, I pre-ordered the book, then I fell down a hole on Etsy where I was looking at all the different merch I could get. So I have also bought a really cute sweatshirt which I can't wait to arrive. I'll put a picture of it here. It's this really cute like candy pink. It's got a nice illustration of a street in the city of Valenda where the story or some of the story is set, and it's got Evangeline's dad's, one of his shops, names under it. I just think it was so cute and I was feeling sad and I wanted to cheer myself up. I think it'll arrive before the last book gets here as well. I also started making a Spotify playlist in preparation for the last book coming out, entitled Eva and Jack's Love Heart Fox Bow and Arrow. I think I've gone properly unhinged. But I just started listening to music, and then all I could think about was their relationship, and every song that I listened to I was like, this is them. This is them. This is them. I'm still making it, but it'll be done by the time the last book comes, and I cannot wait to sit down with a glass of wine, my new sweatshirt on, put that playlist I made on, and just enter into this new book and never come out of it again, hopefully. I'll say goodbye to the world. I am running away with Eva and Jax. I will be their third wheel. Not their third, although maybe. So then, it'd been like maybe half an hour after I'd finished Ballad of Never After, and I had pre-ordered the book. I'd ordered this sweatshirt. I was driving myself crazy. My sister was looking at me like, you're not okay. You need to stop just staring at this book in your lap. Because I was honestly considering just starting reading it over again. But because I'd gone to Sky, I only had the second book, not the first book. And I was like, if I'm going to reread this, I'm going to do it properly. I'm going to reread the first book and then the second book again. I don't want to jump straight into the second book again, even though, yes, I did want to do that desperately. But, you know, I wanted to do it properly. I wanted to give the books the time and attention that they deserved. And then I realised through my Googling, the Caraval series is set in the same world. And then I realised that Jax is a character in the second two books of the Caraval series. And then I realised my entire next week was going to be written off. And then I realised that I was stuck on a Scottish island with one bookshop that I'd already checked did not stock any more Stephanie Garber books. For the next couple of days, there would be no time to order the books to come to me before I had to leave. So I would have to wait for the day that I left Skye, got to Inverness, went to a bookshop before my flight from Inverness back down to Bristol, and just hope to God that Inverness had the book stocked. And it was a bit touch and go for a minute because I was on my bus to Inverness. I was raring to go. I had the plan in my head. I was going to get off the bus, get straight to the bookshop, get the book, get the goods, then go have dinner, read the book while I eat dinner, get to the airport, read the book on the plane, you know. Then I get to the bookshop though in reality, and I'm in the young adult section and I can't see any Stephanie Garber books anywhere. I was literally, my worst nightmares were becoming a reality. But I was brave and I went up to the counter and I talked to a human being and I asked them for help. I was like, do you have any Stephanie Garber books? And they were like, what ones are you looking for? And I was like, you're my new favourite person. And he led me over and they only had the first one, Caraval, and he was so nice. He was like, I can order in the next two for you if you want. And I was like, I'm getting on a plane, don't you worry, I just need the first one. So yeah, I spent every day since I got home reading all three of the Caraval books, Caraval, Legendary and Finale. And I have some thoughts and opinions which I thought would be fun to talk about. So that's what I'm gonna do. I've written notes on my laptop and I'm really excited to talk about them. So for anyone who is watching this who doesn't know what the books are about, hello. These three books are all one series. It's Caraval, Legendary and Finale. And these are about two sisters called Scarlett and Donatella, or Tella for short, who both end up getting swept up in this world of a game called Caraval, which is a travelling game, kind of circusy, fairground energy. I thought those books were gonna fall there. And they end up finding love along the way and drama. And the game is very much like, you never know what's real and what's not real, whether the relationships they're forming is real or if it's just actors. It's a fun time, but these were not initially the object of my obsession, and they're still not. The object of my obsession is the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, which is currently just these two books, but the third one is coming out in October. These take place in the same world, but they're much more fairy tale oriented. And it follows our main character, Evangeline Fox, who goes to the Prince of Hearts, who calls himself Jax. He's also in the Caraval series, and he is one of the Fates, which is one of these godlike creatures whose backstories kind of explain more in Caraval. They're really cool. They were trapped in a deck of cards for a really long time, and in the Caraval book series they're released and cause all sorts of mayhem. But in this book, Eva goes to one of these Fates, the Prince of Hearts, to ask for his help to stop a wedding in which the love of her life is getting married to her stepsister, and then they end up striking a deal that rolls into this whole big other ordeal, and then Jax and Eva end up developing a relationship themselves, and it's so good. Interestingly enough, I actually owned the first book, Caraval, in a hardback, and I must have bought it like right when it came out. And I remember I was in my first year of university, so it must have been like 2016. I had this copy of the book and I started reading it, and I just didn't get into it, and I don't think I got very far, because when I started reading Caraval the other day, I remembered like the first couple pages, but after that I had no clue what was going on. So I really didn't get into Caraval, and I think I gave it to charity. So I've spent double on Caraval because I bought it twice. But I am glad that that's happened, because I don't know if I would have stuck with the Caraval series if I hadn't read Once Upon a Broken Heart first. And that's my hot take. This is going to be full of spoilers. I think I've spoiled stuff already, and I'm sorry if you didn't want that. I can't really talk about the things that I want to talk about without spoiling stuff, and I want to talk about it so bad. So I'm going to rank the books because I love a ranking, and this was really easy ranking to do. Number 1, Ballad of Never After. Enough said, really. Number 2, Once Upon a Broken Heart. Number 3, Legendary. Number 4, Finale. And number 5, Caraval. I think Finale and Caraval were pretty equal for me, but I ultimately prefer Finale because I love Tella as a character, and she's in that more than she's in Caraval. I prefer the Once Upon a Broken Heart series so much more than the Caraval series, and it's for a lot of reasons. The writing is so much stronger in Once Upon a Broken Heart. Stephanie Garber wrote Caraval series first, so it makes sense that her writing would be getting better and better. I think it's so much stronger in Once Upon a Broken Heart, and it's in a style of writing that I much prefer. Although the books are all set in the same world, in Once Upon a Broken Heart, Stephanie really leans more into writing in a fairy tale-esque style and leans into the whimsy of her world. For example, at the beginning of the book, the first wee chapter we get is from the perspective of a bell hanging outside the shop that Evangeline works in, and Stephanie gives the bell this personality and this magic and this idea that the bell was trying to warn Evangeline that someone coming into the shop was going to change their life for the worse. But then Evangeline understanding the ring of the bell as it ringing to notify her that her life's about to change for the better. I love stuff like that. I think it's so quirky and whimsical, and it adds such a like magical feeling to the world, and it's just so entertaining to read. Also, just throughout the series, there's just so many tropes that I love. Enemies to lovers is the main one, and I think it's done really well in this book. It's got some really good humour and angst which offset each other really well, and it's got actual fairy tale lore from the world running alongside it. So it's got the Ballad of the Archer and the Fox as a really main plot point that runs alongside the main narrative of the story. So while you're reading it, it feels like you're reading a fairy tale, but it also feels like the characters are living through a fairy tale too. I also think the world was just described so much better in this book series than in the Caraval series. I think it was much richer. I think this was because of all the little details that are scattered through, like just adding in the names of shops and giving details to fun food and drink, little objects that are mentioned that don't have any other purpose than to just add an element of magic to a moment, which I adore. I love when that's done, and I really do think it adds like I said, such a richness to the world. It makes you want to step into the world much more, for me anyway, than I wanted to step into the world of Caraval, even though it's the same world. I also much prefer the cast of characters in Once Upon a Broken Heart. Jax and Eva's romance is so much more interesting to me, and I think it's because I love both characters so much individually. I think they're both so interesting and endearing as individuals, and there's such a sharp contrast to each other, which makes watching them interact really fun and exciting to see how their relationship unfolds and is going to unfold in the future. It's a really, really fun dynamic as they go from enemies to acquaintances, almost friends, to people who have to work each other towards an end goal, to maybe more than friends. The characters in the Caraval series just don't do it in the same way for me. I do really like Tella. She's definitely my favourite character, aside from Jax, in the series. Probably more than Jax in the Caraval books. But I really don't care much about Scarlett and Julian at all. I think they're quite boring as a couple. And I think you can especially tell in finale when the narrative is kind of split between Tella and Scarlett's perspectives, that Stephanie herself had more fun writing Tella's story than Scarlett's. It just seemed to me that Tella was getting more chapters in the first place, but also she just had more to do. Scarlett was an important part of how the story turned out ultimately, but she wasn't really doing that much in comparison to Tella. And I found that while I was reading it, if I turned the page and saw that it was a Scarlett chapter coming up, I was not as excited as when we went back to Tella's narrative. I think Scarlett and Julian as characters just weren't as interesting, and together they lacked a lot of chemistry in comparison to the other couple in the book, Tella and Legend, or Tella and Jax even. And so I just found myself not necessarily caring what was going to happen to either of them. And I think especially with Julian, we're given so little background about Julian. It's actually crazy how little we know about him. It seems to me that the only driving factors of Julian's personality is that he doesn't age and that he's in love with Scarlett. And that's so boring. Like, I think he's made out to be likeable because he's handsome and cheeky and kind of mysterious, but at the end of the day, like, mystery can only go so far. Like, you have to actually start learning about him at some point in order to keep me interested. And it's the same with Legend. I do prefer Legend as a character, but we don't really know that much about him. The little backstory we are given is quite vague, and I would have loved to have learned more about the different lives he's lived, because he's lived such a long time, but you're just not really given any of that. But at the end of the day, I think his chemistry with Tella did make him more interesting, and the mystery surrounding him was way more interesting than any mystery surrounding Julian, because there were actual answers that were being given about Legend in comparison. And also talk about the supporting characters in Once Upon a Broken Heart. They're so great. I love Lala and Chaos so much. They're so endearing. Lala especially, I love her backstory as a fae. I think she's really interesting. One of my favourite moments in the book as well is when Eva finds out that Lala has betrayed her. And Lala comes to her and she's really sorry, and then Eva, it's a big betrayal, but Eva's like, you know, she's a fae, so her morals are going to be way murkier than a human, so at the end of the day, I'm just going to forgive her. I just thought that was a really nice character moment for Eva, of like showing the level of, or like showing her capacity for understanding that these beings are not human, but that doesn't mean that they don't care in their own ways. I really like that. The main thing, I'm leaning forward because it's about to get serious now. The main thing I love about this series, and that has got me feral for it, is the romance between Eva and Jax. So that's what I'm gonna talk about. I love them so much. Let's start with Jax. I love this man so much. I love him in both series. I love him more so in Once Upon a Broken Heart. That's the soundtrack to this video. But I think that's fair because he's more prominent in Once Upon a Broken Heart. He's literally the main love interest. But it was actually really fun reading Caraval after instead of before, because I went into that series knowing he was coming, knowing much more about his backstory, and already loving him. So I was finding it interesting actually thinking about it after I'd read Caraval, whether I would have loved him as much. I think I probably would have. But if I hadn't read Once Upon a Broken Heart first, would I have loved him as much as if I hadn't known going in who he was and what he was like? I was living for all the moments where he would pop up in Caraval. It was fun reading his interactions with Tella, who is a love interest for him as well, and kind of comparing them in my head with Eva. I think because Tella's supposed to be his true love, it was just really interesting to me because I was reading it, and obviously you're reading it from Tella's perspective, who is not in love with him and is actively trying to go against him. And so maybe that's the reason why I didn't root for them as much, because obviously I love Evangeline and I love them together, but I feel like you can feel a more pure love forming between Jax and Evangeline, and you can feel Jax becoming more of an honest person in Once Upon a Broken Heart than he ever was in the Caraval series. But you have these moments where Tella kind of glimpses into the kind of true Jax beneath his facade, where it's got descriptions of them having a nice moment together and her thinking that she's never seen Jax smile as real as it is in that moment. And those were so few and far between, and I think we get that so much more in Once Upon a Broken Heart. And I just think I love comparing the two in my head. And the way I've been thinking about it in my head is I've been going back and forth over this whole idea of true love, which I will get into in a bit. But I don't think we would have as pure a relationship between Jax and Eva as we do get to see eventually in Ballad of Never After if he hadn't have had this experience with his true love, Tella, in Caraval. I know I'm talking about Eva and Jax, but I also cannot not mention the steamy scene in Finale, the third Caraval book, when Jax and Tella share blood. It was a lot, especially for a young adult book. I love a steamy scene. I kind of steered away from reading young adult books because I liked my romance books to have some spice in them. But then I was reading this book and they're literally just kissing and they're literally just sharing blood, but it was so sensual and I was enraptured in that moment. It was really hot. It reminded me of the scene between Elena and Damon in the Vampire Diaries when Elena feeds off Damon in the bathroom in the restaurant, and she pulls him closer to him and they're thud against a wall and everything, which is also a really sexy scene. But yeah, Jax as a romantic interest is just so much more interesting to me than Julian or Legend, because he is so much more of a villain. You're questioning his motivations the whole way through. He's got that whole villain with a soft side, villain who falls in love and will burn the world for the person he loves, which I'm obsessed with. I love that trope so much. It's toxic. He is a toxic man who I would not be with in real life. Did you see that too? But I love reading about it. I love reading about him. I also, this is so all over the place, I'm so sorry. But going back to comparing Eva and Jax and Tella, I think the thing that makes Eva and Jax make so much more sense to me and have more chemistry, like both emotional and physical, is the fact that Tella and Jax are too similar as people. Oh, are you coming up? Hello, darling. There we go. They both are kind of opposed to love in the same way. Like, Tella's whole storyline is thinking that she is destined always for unrequited love, so she's quite against the idea of falling in love. And Jax has that same kind of viewpoint because of his whole history, and they're kind of connected through her drawing the card when she was little and everything, and which is really interesting and fun to read. But they're also similar in just like fundamental personalities. Like, they're both very flirtatious, free-spirited, kind of wild characters. And I much prefer the interesting dynamic between Eva and Jax, because Eva is so much more of a romantic at heart. She believes in like true love and love conquering all, the power of it, which is such a contrast to how Jax is as a character, even though his whole fate power is to do with love. Also, as a side note about Evangelina's character, I love how her concept of love changes throughout the series. How at the start of the series she believes in this kind of love at first sight, one true love idea, but then as she slowly begins to fall in love with Jax, her concept of love completely changes, and she opens herself up to the idea of a slow burning love that needs to be maintained and nourished. And I love that. I love that idea so much, that you have to kind of work for love sometimes, and it's not always easy, but the ones that aren't always the easiest are always worth fighting for. I got a bit soppy. And yeah, how she kind of realizes that love comes in so many different forms, and that she is kind of discovering that this passionate hatred that she had for Jax has evolved into a passionate love. And I love it so much. I love love, and I love her hair. That's literally just a bullet point I've written down, just I love her hair. I also love that she is so different from Tella and Scarlett in Caraval. She's kind of like a weird combination of the two of them, which makes her into just this wildly different character from the sisters. She's got Tella's rashness and impulsiveness, I would say, and probably her stubbornness too. But she's got Scarlett's ability to love and trust easily and to see the best in people, which I think, she's my favourite main gal. I like how she is a bit naive, but instead of seeing that as a weakness, she sees it as a strength. And she shows that, yeah, sometimes she doesn't always make the best decision because of her naivety, but it's her naivety that allows her to see the world in such a pure and beautiful way. And I think that really is what breaks down Jax's barriers around her. My favourite moments between Jax and Eva are the crypt scene in the first book. That's kind of the first scene where the attraction between them is like fully palpable on the page, which was really tense. The whole situation surrounding it was really tense. And the fact that Jax ended up not biting her and managed to hold back, but was holding on to her so tight throughout the night. Chef's kiss. And then also the sequence of scenes that takes place in the inn in the second book, where they're just kind of in this bubble together, having the most wonderful time as a kind of little couple. It's heartbreaking that they have to break out of that, but I love that we got those moments where Jax was so allowing himself to feel love, even though it was just magic that was letting him do it. Also, at the end of the second book, the whole ending was heart-wrenching, but in the best kind of way. Eva realising how much she loves Jax, and that she just needs to tell him, and then everything will be okay if she is able to tell Jax that she is in love with him. And then the tragedy that happens, and then Jax finding her dead and deciding to use the stones to save her instead of doing what he initially planned, because like, he cares about her so much. Also, every time Jax refers to her as little fox or my love, they're everything to me, those moments. If they don't end up together in the next book, I actually don't know what I'll do. I think I'll riot. I'll riot. I've made some little observations as well, that I'm just going to end on. I think Scarlet's dress in the Caraval series, I get that it's magical, so it is probably always clean. But the fact that she literally never takes it off is so upsetting to me. Like, the feeling of that, I know that it changes and it probably doesn't feel gross, but does she ever wash it? Does it get washed? Is it just self-cleaning? Like, I also think that I wouldn't want to wear something like that because I would never trust. Like, I'm enough of an open book. People can see what I'm feeling very clearly on my face, much to my dismay. I don't want to wear a piece of clothing that also gives away all my true feelings. I think that would be so mortifying. But anyway, I also love the Easter egg reference to Eva that occurs in finale, kind of setting up the next series with her and Jax. When they mention the girl who saved her family and turned herself to stone. I was sat over there and I squealed when I read that bit. And I loved where it comes in the timeline of everything. I started rereading Once Upon a Broken Heart right after I finished finale last night, just because I wanted to kind of go straight into it again and see how it plays out. And I love the fact that she kind of missed that whole week of terror because she turned herself to stone. I loved reading her first interaction with Jax and thinking to myself, oh, this occurred right after the blood scene with Tella. That's so interesting and so fun. I also loved the reveal of what Jax wanted to use the stones for and go back in time and change whatever happened with Tella. And it made me start to think, like, what was he planning to actually do? Was he gonna go back and win Tella back? I think that's the most obvious explanation, but by the time he actually uses the stones, he cares so much for Eva that I wonder if he would go back and just erase the moment that she first made his heart beat so that he never actually met her, because I think that's what I would do. If I was Jax, I don't think I'd want to go back and be with Tella. I'd want to go back and not meet her so that Eva could be my one true love. But that's just me. I'm interested to see if Tella is going to make an appearance in the next book. I really want her to, because I feel like I want her to have an interaction with Jax to give them both some closure, because it wasn't their story. It was Tella's and Legend's story. I get that, but it's still bizarre to me how in finale, like, there is no final argument between the two of them. Jax just disappears as soon as he realizes that Tella is broken free of her spell, and I want to see a kind of conversation between the two of them. I don't know if it'll happen, but I think it'd be really interesting, and I want it because I want to know the explanation behind the whole true love lore and what it means for Jax and Eva's relationship. This is all assuming that Eva will get her memories back, but she has to. Like, can he have multiple true loves? It also makes me think, like, after Tella broke the connection between the two of them and broke free of Jax's spell and maybe broke his heart again, did his heart stop beating again? And then did Eva make it start beating again? Or was it just always beating since then? Because I think that's important information that I need. Also, it's astounding that, I mean, it's obvious, but Jax and Eva haven't kissed. And I want it so bad. And I want it to go down like this. I want Eva to initiate the kiss. I want Jax not to want to kiss her because he's worried that he'll kill her. I want Eva to initiate it, Jax to be like, oh, and then realize she doesn't die, and then just be so passionate. And I want Eva to initiate it because I think that would be so her, like just like throwing herself into love like that. My last observation is just generally thinking about what Stephanie Garber is going to write next, if it'll still be in the same universe and world, and I hope it will be. And I think if she does, it's a high probability that it will focus on Tella and Legend's child because of the bargain that Tella made with the secret people in the last book, where she agrees to give them her child's biggest secret. I think that's a clear setup for a new story, and I'll be really excited to see if that is how it's going to go down. I don't know how long this video is going to end up because I've been talking for 52 minutes now to this camera. I think I'm going to edit it down a lot because all of this will be a lot of rambling, and it probably won't make a lot of sense. If anyone's watching this, you probably are a fan of the book, so I'm hoping that you are able to just keep up with my passionate feelings about these fictional characters and this fictional world. I really loved it. I cannot wait for October to come around. I think it's going to be really hard for me to start reading other books now, but I'm going to do it. Thanks so much for watching. If you've watched all of this, I again apologise, this is so rambly, but I had a lot of fun making it. I hope you have a really good week. Bye!